Neighbor wanted the fence fix, we just removed the fence.
TLDR at bottom. This happened to my friend a couple months ago. Him and his wife just moved into their first house about 6 months ago. Then a strong windstorm came through and damaged their fence. And by damaged their fence I mean the fence was now leaning slightly, leaning about 70 degrees. Because home insurance won't fix the fence plus it being winter, my friend and his wife were going to wait until spring to hire someone to fix/replace their fence. Well, their backyard neighbor did not like that. The backyard neighbor wanted the fence fix ASAP. When the neighbor found out they were going to wait until spring, the neighbor called the city and complained that their fence was out of code.
When the city inspector came out to inspect their fence, it was in fact out of code and needed to be corrected. Now the reason the neighbor was so fixated on the fence being replaced is because the neighbor has a pool in their yard and need to have a fence around their pool for safety. Well, my friend and his wife, now pissed off at their neighbor, decided to only remove the fence and not replace it. This allows them to be in city code, and now when the spring hits, the neighbor is going to need to build a fence on their backside of their yard if they want to fill up their pool for the summer. If the neighbor would have just been nice and not called the city like a Karen, my friend would have built the fence up in the spring. Now problem.
TLDR, wind damaged friend's fence. Friend was going to fix it in the spring. Backyard neighbor wanted it fixed now and called the city. Friend just removed fence instead and neighbor has no fence on their backside of yard.
This is great. Make sure your friend knows to request the neighbor pay for a survey of the property line before fence building starts. Edit to add, please update us on this when the new fence drama starts.
It's hard to live beside some people. I don't blame your friends at all. Somewhat similar story. We have our dogs in a fenced-in yard. Our fence is several feet on our side of the property. He never watches his dog, and his dog would come to the fence and irritate our dogs. They started jumping on the fence and now it's leaning. We wanted to get it fixed as soon as his dog passed, but then he started piling wood up against our fence before we had a chance. The fence that is several feet over our property line, so the wood is on our property. He wanted us to fix the leaning fence because it was making it hard to pile his wood up. The fencing company needs to get on his side of the fence in order to fix it, hence why we kept our fence over on our property line, in case of maintenance.
We told him this and his response was, "I'll put my wood wherever I want." He has 8 acres of land and our fence is the furthest place from his house. Then he called the township about our fence. The township came out, saw the markers for the property line and told us to do whatever we wanted with his wood since it was on our property. Can't wait until spring comes.
Neighbor surprised Pikachu face.
As a former pool owner, that fence rule applies in the winter as well. You could have your friends call the city today and he will have to fix it in a hurry in winter. It's a safety issue and kids can still get stuck in an empty pool.
After the fence is removed, you should call the inspectors yourself to report an easily accessible pool. I wouldn't wait till spring. It'll be more money to install a fence in frozen ground.
I hope the neighbors calls the city to report the pool without fence and possibly make them repair it during the winter. Shit. After dropping the fence, they should have returned the favor and called the city on him for not having the required fence around his pool. Haha. We ended up with a malicious compliance with our back neighbor for something similar to this. Wind blew down a portion of fence between us and nice neighbors. Nice neighbors are on the corner and share their backyard fence with us, and nasty neighbor. Nasty neighbor rents to a very sweet lady. The entire fence needed to be replaced. There were portions that were rotted and starting to fall down. We coordinated with nice neighbor and single neighbor on our other side and everyone agreed to share the cost of a new fence. Nasty neighbor refused and said she installed the fence with her dad and she would just fix the parts that needed to be fixed. We told her that wasn't going to fly because the boards were all rotted and the entire thing was falling down and needed to be replaced. We weren't being jerks. We were being reasonable as the fence was 20+ years old and had never been maintained properly. We had only lived there a year at the time. Technically, the fence was right on her property line. Cue the malicious compliance. We marked the property line and the original survey markers and told them to install the fence on our side of the property, leaving her crappy fence up. The boards faced our side. So with the new fence, she would never be able to replace them without taking down everything on her side. At some point, she came out with her husband and they actually looked at the fence and saw what terrible shape it was in. They contacted us, admitted it needed to be replaced, and we came to an agreement on their contribution. I like to think it was a win-win for everyone. This same neighbor will then ask them to split the cost of putting a new fence by spring, with the rough, ugly side facing them, of course. I recommend ignoring them. Building codes don't care whether it's summer or winter. If the pool's outside, it needs to be fenced in. Call now, when the building inspector has free time. Had something similar happen. Our fence got hit by a flying trampoline. Can't make that up. It was hella windy. 2 walls of the fence were knocked over bad. Both neighbors skipped talking to us and went to the WA immediately. We were fined for being out of regulation. I barely used my backyard anyway and we paid for the fence before they even moved in. So I knocked down the 2 walls and left the back one. Per code I was in regs now without the 2 walls. They tried to complain that we had to put walls up, but ultimately the WA had no power to force us to pay for it. Both neighbors had to pay for our new fence sides. Kiss it, Karens. Thanks for the newer fence. I think you need to call city and complain that their pool is out of code. I am right there with your friend. Here's the setup. My home has alley access to the backyard. The alley is also the sewer right-of-way. However, the city has neglected the alley for decades, ignoring the lean-to across the north access. The 30 feet tall by 2 feet diameter tree growing in the middle of the alley. And code violations on every fence along the several households bordering the alley. So, when I bought the property, I asked the neighbors if I could build the fence across the alley instead of building 65 feet along the property line. All accepted. This was 15 years ago. Last year I was siding my house by myself. A long, difficult process while working full-time. The landlord across the alley threw a fit because his fence was falling down. His fence did not have the code-required gate in it, so he had to access his fence through my gate. I never lock it, but he was inconvenienced, so he called code enforcement on my fence after 15 years. Of course, I was given 6 weeks to remove my fencing. They didn't care about my siding or their failure to remove the tree or the handful of code violations along the alley. I complied without malice, except when I was moving my fence to be within code compliance. I found my survey marker and put my fence inside it. Cue the malice. The entire line of fencing across the alley is inside the alley by 18 inches. Mr. Landlord is going to find himself with 3 properties needing new fencing, gate access to the alley, and less property, all because he threw a fit. Further, the city will need to clear the alley they have ignored for almost as long as I've been alive. I am going to enjoy this shit show. Be sure to report the neighbor now that their pool is out of code. I had a situation sort of like this a few years back where a fence was in bad shape. The owner of the next home did not want to do anything. And I recently switched homeowners insurance. They were not going to cover my home until I repaired the fence. And as I said, my neighbor refused to help. So I just removed the fence. I figured he would be mad. But he never said a word. I would casually ask the neighbor if their insurance company knows they don't have a fence around their pool. I don't think insurance companies give a shit what time of year it is, and that would likely put them in clear violation. If they have mortgage, they more than likely need to retain insurance, or they will be violating their mortgage terms as well. Honestly, upsetting the city is the least of their problem. But how does that work? Who was the owner of the fence on the first place? Sorry, I'm having troubles trying to understand how the things work on your country. Here, if you have a wall, fence, border between your property and your neighbors, you can build up a wall, fence, something else 15 centimeters inside your land, or 30 centimeters. You must share the property of said wall with your neighbor, or your neighbor can build something 15 centimeters into their property. So now, the wind damaged your fence. So it's up to you to repair or not put a new fence. Right? Then if the neighbor wants a new fence there, they must pay for the materials and build it inside their property? Nice. My city requires a fence to have a pool at all, filled or not. So after I took down the fence, I would have called the city and report the neighbor's pool as being in violation. Good luck finding a fence company to put up a fence in the middle of winter. Same happened to my dad. His left fence blew over in storms, and would need new posts putting in. But since it was winter and in England, that wasn't going to work. The neighbor bloke was being a Karen, stating that the leasehold stated he had to replace the fence ASAP. This turned out to be true. What it also stated was the type of fence it needed to be, not the one which my dad was going to pay for, 6 feet high, but the super simple 2 feet high posts with 2 bits of wood between each post. Thanks for saving him money, neighbor. This is fantastic. I would have never thought of this way to get back at them. Also, their code is like my area's code. The best side of the fence has to face out. So if they get a non-chain fence, they not only have to pay for it but get to point the nice side towards their neighbors.
If you enjoyed this video, please check out our playlists full of similar content. Epic Haircast is like doom scrolling for your ears. Please like, share, and subscribe.